I spent a decade sacrificing everything to buy my dream home. My dad yelled, "We need to talk about the house." But my response shocked him. I spent 10 years sacrificing almost everything to buy my dream home. And when I finally got the keys, my own family's reaction almost broke me. On paper, it looked like the perfect happy ending. I was 28, sitting in the living room of a beautiful house I had bought completely on my own. After years of grinding, saving, and saying no to almost every little pleasure. The paint still smelled fresh. The walls were bare, and there were unpacked boxes everywhere. But to me, it already felt like magic. That night was supposed to be my big moment. I had invited my entire family over for a housewarming dinner. In my head, I could already see it. My mom smiling proudly as she walked through the door. My dad pretending not to be impressed but secretly checking out the woodwork. My siblings laughing at the kids running around. All of us crammed around a big dining table. I wanted warmth. I wanted noise. I wanted this house to start its life filled with family. Instead, I spent the whole evening alone. The food got cold. The candles burned low. The guest rooms I had carefully prepared stayed perfectly made and completely empty. At first, I kept checking the driveway, telling myself they were running late. Then I kept checking my phone, expecting at least a "sorry, stuck in traffic" text. But nothing came. Not a single car. Not a single knock. Not a single apology. Hours later, as I sat in my brand new living room surrounded by untouched food and total silence, my phone finally buzzed. It was a message from my dad. Not, "Sorry we missed it." Not, "Congratulations on the house." Just, "We need to talk about the house." And that one text, after everything I had gone through to get here, hurt more than their empty chairs. To really understand why that message cut so deep, you have to know where I started. My name is Emma. I am 28 now, and I grew up in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. My parents, George and Susan, worked whatever jobs they could find just to keep a roof over our heads. My mom waited tables in the mornings and cleaned offices at night. My dad bounced between construction, security, and any odd job that paid. My younger sister Rachel and my little brother David shared the second bedroom. I slept on a pull-out couch in the living room until I was 18. Money was always this heavy thing hanging over everything we did. I remember watching my mom stretch a single pound of ground beef into multiple meals by adding more beans and rice every time. I remember my dad standing in the hallway, staring at the electric bill like it had personally insulted him. If you left a light on in an empty room, you were going to hear about it. He would flip the switch off and say, "Electricity costs money we don't have," with this tired voice that shut down any argument. But once a month, we had this weird little ritual that changed everything for me. My mom would talk my dad into borrowing his brother's car, and we would go for a Sunday drive through the rich neighborhoods on the other side of town. Those streets felt like another planet. Big trees, wide sidewalks, perfect lawns, and houses that looked like they belonged in magazines. I would sit in the back seat, with my face pressed against the window, picking out my favorites. "Mom, look at the one with the red door," I would say, pointing at some perfect craftsman with a big front porch and hanging flower baskets. She would smile and say something like, "That one is beautiful, Emma. All that sunlight must feel amazing." And every single time, my dad would give the same answer. People like us do not own houses like that. He did not shout it, but he said it like it was just a basic fact of life, like gravity. He would grip the steering wheel a little tighter and tell us it was better not to fill our heads with dreams that would never happen. Those words should have crushed the idea. Instead, they turned into fuel. I decided, sitting in the back of that borrowed car, that one day I would prove him wrong. By 15, I had convinced the owner of a little diner to hire me for weekends and a few evenings after school. Every shift, I would come home smelling like fries and coffee, but I loved the feeling of earning my own money. I kept my tips and pay in a metal lockbox under my pull-out bed. When my parents found out I was working, they told me I had to start helping with bills. So I did, but even then, I forced myself to save half of every paycheck. It was not a lot, but every small amount felt like one tiny step closer to a different life. In high school, I met my guidance counselor, Mrs. Garner, who quietly became one of the first people to really see what I was trying to do. One afternoon, she called me into her office, practically buzzing with excitement, and showed me an email on her computer. I had earned a full scholarship to the state university, housing included. I just stood there and cried. It meant I could actually leave that pull-out couch and be the first person in my family to go to college. I thought my family would be over the moon. My mom hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and told me she always knew I was special. My dad nodded, said he was proud, but immediately reminded me that college still comes with a lot of extra costs and that I should not get too big for my boots. Rachel seemed happy for me. David was too young to really get it. What I did not realize then was that this was the start of something bigger. With every step I took toward the life I wanted, the distance between me and my family quietly started to grow. College hit me harder than I expected, and not just because of the classes. The scholarship covered tuition and basic housing, but that was it. Books, food, transportation, anything extra. That was all on me. So while a lot of other freshmen were figuring out parties and clubs, I was figuring out how to balance 2 jobs with a full course load. During the week, I worked at the campus bookstore between classes, shelving textbooks for kids whose parents had paid for everything in advance. On weekends, I waited tables at a restaurant just off campus. There were nights when I would get back to my dorm after midnight, crash for a few hours, and then drag myself out of bed for an early lecture. Sleep stopped being a regular part of life and turned into something I squeezed in whenever I could. Even with all that, I kept saving. It was not much, just little bits tucked away whenever possible, but I refused to lose that habit. It reminded me of who I was doing this for and what I was working toward. Every time I transferred a few dollars into savings, I pictured that house with the red door from our old Sunday drives. The social part of college almost broke me in a different way. A lot of my classmates came from money. They would talk about spring break trips, family ski vacations, and internships their parents had set up at big companies. Their moms were lawyers and doctors. Their dads were executives and business owners. Meanwhile, my parents were still juggling hourly jobs, and I was eating instant noodles between shifts. I learned to keep my background vague. If people asked, I would say things like, "My parents work a lot," and then steer the conversation away. I always felt like there was this huge, invisible gap between us that no one else could see but me. I was scared that if I talked too honestly about where I came from, they would treat me differently, or worse, pity me. Calling home did not help much. My mom wanted to hear every little detail about campus life. She asked about my classes, the library, the dorms, the cafeteria, food, everything. In some ways, it felt like she was living through me. My dad's questions were very different. He would ask how much books cost, how many hours I was working, whether I was wasting money on nonsense. He never asked if I was happy, just if I was being practical. My siblings slowly drifted away. Rachel got busy with high school drama, friends, and her boyfriend. David started hanging around with guys from the neighborhood and acted bored whenever I tried to talk about school. Our shared childhood did not seem strong enough to hold us together once my life moved onto a completely different track. 4 years later, graduation day came. I stood there in my cap and gown, scanning the crowd for my family. Parents and siblings were everywhere, waving signs, cheering, taking pictures. I kept looking for my dad's face, for Rachel, for David. But in the end, only my mom showed up. She wore a simple dress I knew she had saved for, and she smiled like her heart was going to burst when she saw me. When I asked where everyone else was, she looked away and said your dad had picked up an extra shift. Rachel had a school project due, and David was not feeling well. I nodded like I understood, but inside it felt like something had cracked. We took pictures together, just the 2 of us, me holding my diploma like proof that the last 4 years had meant something. Later, I would realize that day set a pattern. From that point on, most of my big moments passed with my family, either halfway present or not there at all. After graduation, I landed an entry-level job at a mid-sized marketing firm downtown. The salary was not huge, but it was steady, and there was room to grow. I found a tiny studio apartment about 20 minutes away by bus. The whole place was under 400 square feet. The kitchen was so small I could almost touch both counters without moving my feet. But it was mine. And more importantly, the rent was cheap enough that I could stick to a strict saving plan. I built a budget that became my new religion. 45% of my paycheck went to essentials like rent, food, and transportation. 35% went straight into my house fund. The last 20% was for everything else, including the rare movie or dinner out. I tracked every single dollar in a spreadsheet and watched my savings grow, line by careful line. My coworkers thought I was intense. My friend Lily loved concerts and weekend trips and would always say, "You're only young once, Emma. You have to live a little." I would smile and tell her I was fine, but deep down, I knew I was not willing to trade long-term freedom for short-term fun. That dream house had become more than just a goal. It had become proof that I could break out of the story my family had always told about people like us. My career started to move. In my second year, I got promoted to account manager. By my third year, I had climbed again to senior account manager. Each raise went almost completely into my house fund. I did not upgrade my apartment. I did not buy a new car. I stayed small on purpose so my savings could keep growing. On top of that, I started a side hustle managing social media for small local businesses. It began with one client, a florist near my apartment, and slowly grew into several regular accounts. Most evenings and weekends, while other people were relaxing, I was writing captions, scheduling posts, and analyzing engagement data. The extra income gave my house fund a serious boost, but it also meant I had almost no personal life. Friends eventually stopped inviting me on expensive nights out because they knew I would say no. My apartment stayed barely furnished with secondhand furniture. I skipped vacations entirely. Even holidays turned into work opportunities because businesses still needed online content. By the time I had been at the firm for 3 years, I had money in the bank, a solid career, and a reputation for being disciplined. But the gap between me and my family had only gotten wider. They saw the sacrifices, but not the dream behind them. And the more I pushed forward, the more it felt like they were pulling away. In my third year at the firm, something unexpected slipped into my carefully planned life. His name was Ethan. We met in the elevator one random Tuesday morning. He worked in the legal office a couple of floors above mine. He noticed the stack of social media strategy documents in my arms and joked that it looked like I was carrying a second job. He was charming in this calm, steady way. We started with casual small talk in the elevator, then bumped into each other at the coffee shop downstairs, then ended up grabbing coffee by accident, more than once. Coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into dinner. Before I really processed it, we were actually dating. Our relationship grew slowly, which worked for me. Ethan knew from the start that I had a packed schedule between my full-time job and my side clients. At first, he thought it was impressive. He told me he admired my discipline and how focused I was. We had movie nights at my tiny apartment, grabbed cheap takeout, and sometimes took short weekend drives just to get out of the city. For a while, it felt like I had finally found some kind of balance. I was still grinding, still saving, but now there was someone to share the quiet moments with. He would listen when I talked about my dream house and how long I had been chasing it. He would say things like, "When you finally get that place, it's going to be incredible." About 7 months into the relationship, Ethan brought up the idea of moving in together. He framed it as a financial decision. If we split rent, we could both save more, he said. We could afford a nicer place than either of us has now, and you'd reach your house goal even faster. On paper, it made perfect sense. But I felt this wave of hesitation I could not quite explain. Sharing a space meant sharing decisions, sharing money, sharing routines. I had spent so many years carefully protecting my financial plan that the idea of tying it to someone else's choices scared me. I told him no. Not yet. He took it well, at least at first. He said he understood and that we could revisit the idea later. But that conversation planted a seed. As the years went on, those small cracks grew. Ethan started to see my savings habits less as dedication and more as obsession. Every time I turned down a weekend trip with his friends or a destination wedding, it became a little point of tension. He would say things like, You're allowed to spend money on things that make you happy, you know? And I would reply that my future house did make me happy. One night, after I declined yet another trip because it would set my timeline back, we had our worst argument. He told me there was more to life than preparing for some future that might never happen, that I was missing everything happening right now. It hit me hard because part of me knew he was not entirely wrong, but the idea of loosening my grip on the dream made me feel like I was betraying myself. Eventually, we broke up. It was not dramatic, just a painful, quiet ending after one too many arguments about priorities. He wanted a life that felt good in the present. I was still building a life that might feel amazing later. Losing him hurt, but underneath the sadness was this cold, clear understanding. If I had to choose, I was always going to choose the future I was building. Meanwhile, my relationship with my family kept shifting in uncomfortable ways. My mom visited my places a few times, but she always looked slightly out of place. She would say things like, "This area feels so different from our neighborhood," while watching people walk by with laptops and expensive coffee. My dad refused to visit at all. He would say that part of town was too fancy, and complain about parking whenever I invited him. My brother started working on and off in similar physical jobs to what my dad did, and he mostly reached out when he needed help. When I offered to help him with a budget or look into training programs, he got defensive. He said, "Not everyone wants to work themselves to death chasing some dream." My sister got married young, had 2 kids, and our conversations turned into updates about their milestones. Anytime I mentioned my job or how much I had managed to save, she would quickly change the subject. 9 years into my career, I was sitting in a meeting room during a client presentation when something clicked. A senior leader we were pitching casually mentioned buying a first investment property in their early 30s. They said the best time to build wealth was when you had income but before you had big family obligations. The tone was casual, but the words lodged in my brain. On the ride home, I opened my budgeting spreadsheet and started running numbers. Between my salary, a bit of side income, and the savings I had built up over the years, I realized something wild. I was closer to my home goal than I thought. If I stayed disciplined, I could buy a place earlier than my original timeline. That night, I reached out to a mortgage specialist to see if what I was imagining was actually realistic. The meeting changed everything. He went through my credit, my savings, my income streams, and then looked up at me and said I had already done the hard part. Most people struggled with the saving stage. I had quietly stuck with it for almost a decade. My pre-approval came back higher than I expected. But even then, I refused to aim for the maximum. I wanted room to breathe. Room for repairs, surprises, and a life that did not feel like a tightrope. With that number in hand, the next step finally became real. It was time to start looking for the home I had been dreaming about since those slow Sunday drives as a kid. House hunting turned out to be way more emotional and exhausting than I ever expected. Through a work contact, I got introduced to a real estate agent who specialized in first-time buyers. From the start, I knew exactly what I wanted. A place with classic character. At least 3 bedrooms so my family could visit and I could have a home office. A neighborhood with trees, personality, and a reasonable commute. I told her, "I've been picturing this house for years. I don't know every detail, but I'll know it when I see it." She nodded, took notes, and warned me that the market was competitive. Still, I felt ready. I had my savings, my pre-approval, and a very clear picture in my head. We saw house after house, weekend after weekend. Some were almost right, but not quite. One had amazing charm, but obvious damage hidden under fresh paint. Another had the perfect layout, but an aging electrical system that would cost a fortune to fix. A few were beautiful, but would add an extra hour to my daily commute. By the time we hit around 30 properties, I was exhausted. Walking out of one almost perfect place with a crumbling foundation, I finally said, "Maybe I'm being too picky. Maybe I should just lower my expectations." She looked me straight in the eye and said, "You have been patient and deliberate for years. The right house is worth waiting for. Don't sell yourself short now." Something about that settled me. I reminded myself that I had not sacrificed my 20s just to settle at the finish line. Then came property number 35. We turned onto a quiet, tree-lined street in a historic neighborhood, and before the car even stopped, I saw it. A craftsman-style home with a wide front porch, detailed woodwork, and a red front door. It looked so much like the houses from those Sunday drives that my heart started pounding. "This one looks promising," Claire said, noticing my expression. When we walked inside, it felt like stepping into a memory and a future at the same time. Original hardwood floors ran through the entire first floor. Built-in bookshelves from the brick fireplace. The kitchen had been remodeled, but whoever had done it had kept the character of the house intact while still adding modern appliances. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms with sloped ceilings and dormer windows that let in soft, natural light. I walked into the largest bedroom, sunlight pouring across the wide wood floors, and felt this wave of emotion hit me so hard my eyes stung. I ran my hand along the old doorframe and said out loud, "This is it. This feels like coming home to a place I've never been before." Claire nodded. She knew. She told me the asking price was near the top of my range, but fair considering the location and condition. "If you're serious, we should move quickly," she said. That night, I barely slept. We submitted an offer at asking price and included a personal letter from me to the sellers. In it, I explained that I was a first-generation homeowner who had spent most of my life believing houses like theirs were out of reach. I promised I would take care of their home the way they had. There were multiple offers, including at least one that came in higher than mine. While the sellers were deciding, every phone notification made my stomach flip. 4 days later, I finally got the call. My offer had been accepted. The sellers, an older couple getting ready to downsize, chose me because my letter reminded them of why they had loved the house in the first place. The financing process was not smooth. My side business income made the underwriters nervous, and they wanted extra documentation. My closing date got pushed back a few weeks, and a backup buyer hovered in the background in case my deal fell apart. I spent nights pulling tax returns, profit and loss statements, and contracts, terrified it would all slip away at the last minute. Then, finally, approval came through. On closing day, I signed what felt like a mountain of papers, initialed page after page, and then, at the end of it all, someone slid a small set of keys across the table. For a second, I just stared at them. Then I picked them up and felt everything I had worked for land in my hands. After everyone left, I asked if I could have a few minutes alone in the empty house. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, running my fingers along the banister, listening to the quiet. In the living room, I sat down on the floor and cried. They were not sad tears. They were 10 years of stress, doubt, and sacrifice finally pouring out. The girl who grew up sleeping on a pull-out couch in a cramped apartment now owned a craftsman home with a red door in a neighborhood she used to only drive through. For the first time in my life, the dream felt real. And the first people I wanted to share it with were the same people who had told me it would never happen. Right after closing, I took pictures of every room, even though most of them were completely empty. I wanted to capture the before, so I could remember exactly how this moment felt. Then, standing in the master bedroom with the evening light on the walls, I opened our family group chat. I typed, "Just closed on my first house. I can't wait for you all to see it. I'm planning a family dinner here in 3 weeks, Saturday night. Please save the date." I attached a photo of the front of the house with the red door and hit send. For a few minutes, I just stared at the screen, waiting. The replies trickled in slowly. My mom sent, "Congratulations, honey. I'm so proud of you," with a heart. Rachel reacted to the photo with a simple thumbs-up emoji. David did not say anything at all. My dad finally wrote, "Houses like that are expensive to maintain. Hope you budgeted for repairs." Did it sting? Of course, but I refused to let their lukewarm responses ruin this. I told myself that once they stepped inside, once they saw what I had built, maybe they would understand. Maybe they would see the years of sacrifice behind these walls and feel proud, even if they could not say it out loud yet. The next couple of weeks were a blur of moving and planning. My old apartment furniture looked tiny inside the new house. The sofa that had filled my studio barely took up a corner of the living room. My little 2-person dining table looked silly in a full dining room. I did what I could, one room at a time. I found a second-hand wooden dining table that could seat 8 people and spent a weekend sanding and painting it. I bought simple chairs from a budget store and imagined my family sitting around that table, finally all in one place again. I set up the guest rooms with so much care. For my parents, I splurged on a good mattress and soft bedding, because I knew my dad's back always acted up when he slept somewhere new. For Rachel and her husband and kids, I made space with a queen bed and an air mattress, plus a few toys and books for the kids. For David, I cleared out the small third bedroom, which I planned to use as an office later, and turned it into a simple but comfortable room just for him. Grocery shopping before the housewarming, I filled my cart with everyone's favorite foods. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes for my dad. Blueberry cobbler for my mom. Caesar salad for Rachel. Buffalo chicken dip for David. The total at checkout made me swallow hard. But I told myself, this is worth it. This is my family. This is our fresh start. Around the house, I added little personal touches. I created a photo wall in the hallway using old family pictures. My parents on their wedding day, Rachel and David splashing in a kiddie pool. One rare beach day where we were all together. I noticed how few recent photos we had, and I thought, we'll fix that this weekend. He even made small welcome baskets. For my mom, a gardening book and seed packets so we could plan a backyard garden together. For my dad, a keychain with my new address engraved on it, a quiet way of saying he was always welcome. For Rachel's kids, crayons and coloring books. For David, a gift card for a local brewery tour I thought we might do together. By the morning of the dinner, everything was ready. The table was set, the food was prepped, the beds were made. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. This house was not just proof of what I had accomplished. It was supposed to be the place where my family and I finally came back together. The afternoon of the housewarming, the whole place smelled like home cooking. The pot roast was in the oven, vegetables roasting on a tray, cobbler cooling on the counter. I lit a few candles, straightened the chairs one last time, and checked the time. They were supposed to arrive at 6. At 5:50, I was excited. At 6:10, I told myself they were just running late. At 6:30, I checked the group chat to see if I had mixed up the date. I had not. At 6:45, I started refreshing my messages every couple of minutes, waiting for something. A stuck in traffic, a running behind, anything. Nothing came. The food finished cooking and started to cool. The pot roast that I had made exactly how my dad liked it just sat there. The salad wilted a little. The dip lost its heat. The candles burned lower. The house, which had felt so full of promise that morning, started to feel too big, too quiet. I walked past each guest room, looking at the neatly folded towels, the welcome baskets, the carefully made beds. Every empty room felt like a tiny rejection. Around 8, it finally sank in. They were not coming. Not one of them. I sat down at the head of my new dining table, the one I had painted with my own hands, and stared at the empty chairs. The hurt was sharp, but underneath it was something else. A tired, familiar feeling. This was not the first time my family had failed to show up for a big moment in my life. It just happened to be the first time it happened in a house I owned. Around 9, when I had started packing leftovers into containers, my phone buzzed. For a second, my heart jumped. Maybe it was an apology, an explanation, anything that could make this feel less deliberate. It was a text from my dad. Not a missed call, not a voice message, just a short line on the screen. We need to talk about the house. No, I'm sorry we didn't make it. No, congratulations. Just that one sentence, turning my dream into a problem to be discussed. I stared at it, feeling the anger rise up through the sadness. After everything I had done, this was what he wanted to say. I set the phone down on the counter and just stood there for a minute, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the kitchen clock. For years, I had twisted myself into knots, trying to keep the peace, trying to make my family proud, trying not to make anyone feel left behind. Now I was standing in the middle of the life I had built, realizing that some people did not want to meet me here. I picked the phone back up and read my dad's text again. We need to talk about the house. I knew exactly what that probably meant. He wanted to warn me about money, or hint that I should help more with their bills, or start treating my house like some kind of family asset. Maybe he felt entitled to a say in what I had done, simply because he was my father. For the first time, I did not swallow my feelings and send a polite answer. Instead, I typed slowly and carefully, "Dad, there is nothing to talk about. This house is mine. I worked for it. I saved for it. I invited all of you to celebrate with me tonight, and no one showed up. I'm not going to discuss selling it, changing it, or using it for anyone else's benefit. If you want to be part of my life here, it has to start with respect." I stared at those words for a long time before pressing send. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from release. Minutes passed. Then he replied, "You've changed. Don't forget where you came from." I looked around at the walls, the floors, the table, the untouched plates. He was right. I had changed, but not in the way he meant. I had gone from a girl who believed people like us don't get that, to a woman who had made it happen anyway. That night, as I put leftovers in the fridge and blew out the last candle, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would stop begging my family to be proud of me. I would stop shrinking my joy to make other people more comfortable. This house was never just about proving my dad wrong. It was about building a life where love, support, and effort go both ways. If my family wanted a place at my table, there would always be a chair. But from that night on, I decided I would fill this home with people who showed up, not just people who shared my last name. After that night, the house felt different. For a while, every room reminded me of the people who were supposed to be there and chose not to come. The guest bed stayed perfectly made. The welcome basket sat untouched. The photo wall in the hallway, full of memories from a smaller, poorer life, seemed to stare back at me with questions I could not answer. But slowly, something shifted. On quiet mornings, I would drink coffee on the front porch and watch the sun hit that red door. And instead of thinking about who was missing, I started thinking about who had carried me here. The teenage girl working double shifts, the college student pulling all-nighters, the young woman turning down vacations and nights out so she could tuck away just a little more. The silence that had felt like punishment started to feel like proof. Proof that I could build stability without anyone holding the ladder. Proof that I could create a home where love was chosen, not owed. It still hurt that my family did not want to celebrate with me, but it no longer felt like a reason to doubt myself. It felt like a reason to choose myself. So that is how a decade of sacrifice, a red door dream house, and one short text from my dad forced me to redraw every line I had with my family. Emma did not just buy a home. She bought proof that the story she had been handed as a kid did not have to be the story she lived as an adult. Maybe you see yourself in her a little. Maybe you have worked your way into a new life that some of your family cannot, or will not, understand. Maybe you have had a big moment where the people you loved most did not show up. If you were Emma, what would you have said back to your dad after that message? Would you have drawn the same boundary, or tried to keep the peace? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around.